The night glittered with champagne flutes, flashing cameras, and the restless heartbeat of Miami's elite. The Hale Foundation's annual yacht gala was supposed to be a celebration of success, an extravagant show of wealth cruising against the Atlantic's restless waves. The air smelled of sea salt, mixed with perfume worth more than a family car. Laughter rippled across the deck like music from another world, a world where appearances mattered more than loyalty. Lillian Carter stood at the edge of that world, her hand instinctively resting over the swell of her belly. 6 months pregnant, dressed in a pale silk gown that floated like moonlight, she looked fragile yet radiant. Her almond eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the only man she thought she could trust, her husband, Richard Hale. Richard, however, was nowhere near her side. The successful real estate magnate had become the life of the gala, his arm draped protectively, almost possessively, around Vanessa Brooks. The young brunette assistant glowed in a crimson dress that clung to every dangerous curve. She laughed too loudly, tossed her hair too boldly, while Richard leaned closer, whispering things that made her cheeks flush. Every flash of the paparazzi cameras seemed to frame them as the perfect couple, as though his actual wife were invisible. Lillian's heart stuttered. She had told herself the rumors were exaggerations, just whispers born from jealousy. Yet tonight the truth stood undeniable, paraded under crystal chandeliers and the eyes of hundreds of guests. Her throat tightened, but she forced her chin higher. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The yacht glided further from shore, city lights shrinking into distant stars. Music swelled, violins and jazz trumpets blending with the rhythm of waves. Waiters weaved through the crowd with silver trays. Toasts were raised in Richard's honor. Vanessa clinked her glass against his with a smug smile, as though she had already won the crown. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice thundered across the deck, amplified by the microphone. "Tonight is not just about wealth. It's about vision. It's about building futures." He paused, squeezing Vanessa's hand deliberately. "And it's about the people who stand beside us as we chase our dreams." The crowd applauded. Lillian felt her chest hollow out. She was the wife carrying his child, yet the man she had sacrificed her career for stood there, publicly crowning another woman as his partner. The deck tilted slightly as the waves grew restless. Guests swayed with laughter, too intoxicated to notice the sharp change in the wind. The sea roared beneath, darker than velvet, hungrier than any secret whispered tonight. Lillian took a careful step back, the heels of her shoes tapping against polished wood. Her vision blurred, whether from tears or from the sudden dizziness of pregnancy, she couldn't tell. She gripped the railing, desperate for air. It was then the chaos erupted. A loud crack split the night, the sound of a champagne bottle slipping, crashing against the deck. A startled guest stumbled, colliding into Vanessa. She screamed, her heels snapping against the wooden floor. In a blur of sequins and panic, she lost her balance and pitched backward over the railing. The crowd gasped, but Lillian, already unsteady, was too close. The sudden movement jolted her as another guest bumped into her shoulder. Her body lurched forward, and before she could scream, she too was falling. Two women, one carrying an unborn child, the other dripping with ambition, plunged into the black Atlantic. The world slowed. The music cut off, glasses shattered on the deck as people cried out. The icy water swallowed Lillian like a merciless beast, sucking the air from her lungs, wrapping her in darkness. Her arms flailed, her gown dragging her down, heavy as chains. Salt water burned her throat as she gasped for breath. She broke the surface once, choking, clutching her belly instinctively. Her scream ripped through the night. "Richard!" Above her, panic ruled the deck. People rushed to the railing. Spotlights swung wildly, slicing across the waves. And then she saw him. Richard. Her husband, her protector. The man who had promised to love her in sickness and in health, till death do us part. He was leaning over the railing, toward Vanessa. His eyes locked on the mistress, thrashing wildly, shrieking for help. Without hesitation, he tore off his tuxedo jacket and leapt. Not toward his wife. Not toward the mother of his unborn child. Toward Vanessa. The ocean roared louder, like it too understood the betrayal. Lillian's world shattered as she fought to keep afloat. Her limbs grew numb, each kick weaker than the last. She tried to cry out again, but salt water filled her mouth. Her silk gown twisted around her legs, dragging her deeper. She saw flashes, Richard wrapping his arm around Vanessa, pulling her up like a hero in a romance novel. Guests cheered in relief. Cameras clicked. Lillian's voice, hoarse and desperate, was drowned beneath applause. She slipped under again, the cold cutting through her body, the weight of betrayal heavier than the sea itself. Her vision darkened, thoughts scattering. Not the baby. Please, not the baby. The last thing she heard was Vanessa sobbing against Richard's chest, and Richard murmuring, "I've got you, you're safe now." Not a single word for his wife. The Atlantic swallowed Lillian whole. And on that glittering deck above, beneath chandeliers and champagne bubbles, the woman who carried his legacy was forgotten. But fate was not done with Richard Hale. His choice would not vanish into the night. It would return, sharp, merciless, unforgettable. Because what he left to drown would one day rise. And when she returned, she would not come back as the fragile wife he ignored, but as the storm he could never escape. The waves had nearly claimed her, yet destiny had other plans. Hours later, Lillian Carter lay in a stark white hospital bed, her skin pale, lips trembling, body wrapped in blankets that could not warm her. Machines beeped softly, their rhythm a cruel reminder that another heartbeat, the tiny one she carried inside, was gone. The doctors had delivered the verdict in clipped, careful tones. The shock, the trauma, the cold ocean had cost her the child. She heard their words but felt them more like knives twisting in her chest. A sob rose, but she swallowed it. The world had already stolen too much. She would not let it see her break. Yet behind those silent tears was the story of a woman most people never truly knew. Lillian had not been born into luxury. She grew up in a modest neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia, where magnolia trees shaded cracked sidewalks and cicadas sang in the humid summers. Her father, a mechanic, worked long hours fixing engines. Her mother, a piano teacher, filled the house with music, even when bills piled on the kitchen counter. Lillian's earliest memories were not of wealth but of sound, tiny fingers stumbling across ivory keys, her mother's patient voice guiding her through every note. By the time she was 16, Lillian's gift was undeniable. She played Chopin as if she had lived through his sorrows, Brahms as if she had shared his fire. Scholarships carried her to Juilliard, where she trained among prodigies. Yet while others dreamed of Carnegie Hall and international tours, Lillian dreamed of something simpler: a family. She believed music could live in children's laughter, in a husband's steady presence, in a home filled with warmth. That belief had made her vulnerable. She met Richard Hale during her second year of college. He was older, confident, with a smile that promised the world. He spoke of skyscrapers he would build, fortunes he would claim, but when he looked at her, he spoke softer. "You ground me, Lily," he had whispered once, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "You make all the noise fade." It felt like fate. For a girl who had grown up counting pennies, his ambition was dazzling. For a man clawing his way into high society, her innocence was refreshing. Within a year, she traded auditions for a small piano studio, teaching neighborhood children instead of chasing stages. Within 2, she was Mrs. Richard Hale. Her friends had raised eyebrows. Why dim her own light for a man so consumed by his? Lillian only smiled. Love isn't about spotlights. It's about building something together. For years, she believed it. She believed it as she hosted his business dinners in their Manhattan townhouse, wearing the gowns he picked for her. She believed it as she left her own dreams in boxes beneath the bed, sheet music yellowing with time. She believed it every time he said, "Next year will be different, Lily. Next year will slow down." But next year never came. Instead came late nights, client meetings that stretched till dawn, the scent of perfume not her own on his suits. She told herself it was stress, that men in his world lived like that. She waited, patient, faithful, carrying the weight of his absence in silence. And when the test showed 2 pink lines, she smiled through tears, certain this child would bring him back to her. For a moment, it had. Richard kissed her forehead, promised they would be a family, spoke of nurseries painted sky blue or soft lavender. She let herself hope. But hope had drowned in the Atlantic with her. Now, in the hospital room, Lillian stared at the ceiling tiles as memories surged. Her mother's music, Richard's first kiss, the way he had once tucked her hair behind her ear, as if she were the only woman alive. How had those hands chosen to pull another from the sea while leaving her to sink? A soft knock broke the silence. A nurse stepped in, her eyes kind but heavy with pity. "Mrs. Hale," she said gently, "your husband is outside. Do you want me to let him in?" Lillian's stomach clenched. Husband. The word tasted like ash. Moments later, Richard entered. His suit was pressed, his hair immaculately styled, as though he had just come from another gala. Not a trace of seawater remained. Only his cologne, sharp and suffocating, lingered in the sterile air. He didn't rush to her side. He didn't take her hand. He simply stood at the foot of the bed, eyes flicking to the monitor, then back to her face. "You're alive," he said flatly, almost as if it were an inconvenience. Then with a sigh, "Lily, you have to understand. Everyone was watching. Vanessa panicked, and if I hadn't—" Lillian turned her face away, her jaw trembling. He was explaining, justifying, already shaping the narrative that would absolve him. But nothing could rewrite what she had seen, his body diving toward Vanessa, his arms shielding her, while his wife fought the ocean alone. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, soaking the pillow. She didn't beg, she didn't argue. Something inside her had cracked too deeply for words. Richard exhaled, irritated by her silence. "Don't make this harder than it is. You're strong. You'll get over it. And for God's sake, don't tell anyone about losing the baby. It'll ruin everything we've built." The words struck harder than the waves ever could. She had lost her child. He had lost his soul. As the door closed behind him, Lillian pressed her hand to her stomach, to the emptiness that remained. Her body shook, but not with weakness, with the first tremors of something fierce awakening inside her. The woman who once gave up her spotlight for love was gone. The woman who drowned was gone. What would rise in her place would not be silent. And somewhere beyond those hospital walls, destiny was already moving. A man from her past, Ethan Ward, was about to re-enter her life, carrying the power Richard never imagined she could wield. The city of Miami glittered like a jewel that night, the skyline carved against the velvet horizon. Skyscrapers shimmered with glass and neon, while the harbor pulsed with life. Yachts bobbed under strings of fairy lights, each vessel competing to prove who held more power, more influence, more secrets. But none outshone the Hale Foundation's gala yacht, an ocean palace worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. It was a ship designed to impress. Golden chandeliers swayed gently with the tide, their light scattering across marble floors flown in from Italy. Velvet curtains framed glass doors that opened onto terraces draped with orchids. Champagne fountains sparkled, caviar pyramids towered on silver trays, and a live jazz orchestra played as if even the Atlantic bowed to their rhythm. Guests in gowns and tuxedos drifted through the glittering maze, their laughter sharp as crystal. From the outside, the yacht embodied triumph, yet beneath the perfume and polished smiles, cracks pulsed like veins. For Richard Hale, the evening was more than philanthropy. It was spectacle, a coronation of his ambition. Every camera flash was a stone in the empire he wanted the world to see. And standing at his side, Vanessa Brooks, his mistress, wore her crimson gown like a crown jewel, daring anyone to question her place. To the world, they looked invincible. To Lillian Carter, it felt like exile in plain sight. Hours before the fall into the ocean, Lillian had arrived quietly, stepping onto the gangway as photographers swarmed Richard and Vanessa. Their laughter carried over the crowd like champagne bubbles, shallow and intoxicating. Lillian walked alone, her pale silk gown hugging the curve of her stomach, her heels tapping against the polished deck. Cameras barely noticed her, as though she were a shadow in her own marriage. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Chatter revolved around stock prices, real estate empires, and private jets. Waiters glided with trays of foie gras and oysters, their faces impassive as million-dollar deals were whispered over crystal glasses. To the guests, suffering was abstract, a statistic for a speech, never a lived experience. Yet in one corner, away from the chandelier's glare, Lillian had found a sliver of silence. She rested against the railing, letting the ocean breeze cool her burning cheeks. Her fingers brushed her belly. She whispered promises only her child could hear. "You will never feel alone. I will protect you, even if the world turns its back." The irony was cruel. Hours later, the world did turn its back. But before that tragedy, the gala itself had staged the perfect theater for betrayal. Richard played the role of host flawlessly, striding through clusters of investors with his arm glued to Vanessa's waist. He clinked glasses, posed for cameras, spun grand promises of expansion. Each gesture was a performance, rehearsed and deliberate. Guests ate it up, too blinded by his rising star to notice the storm brewing beneath the surface. And yet, not everyone was fooled. Among the guests was a figure who watched with quiet intensity, Ethan Ward. The reclusive tech magnate had slipped onto the yacht with little fanfare. His tailored navy suit was understated compared to the flamboyance around him, but the room shifted subtly when he entered. Power didn't always need volume. Sometimes it was carried in silence, in the way eyes followed him, in the whispers that trailed his name. Ethan had not come for Richard. He had come because the Foundation's work intersected with one of his philanthropic ventures. But when his gaze landed on Lillian, standing alone by the railing, something inside him stilled. He recognized her instantly. Years had passed since Juilliard, since the girl with music in her veins had filled rehearsal halls with emotion. She was different now, her shoulders heavier, her eyes dimmed, yet it was her. Lillian Carter, the girl who once turned a crowded hall silent with nothing but a piano and her soul. He opened his mouth to greet her, but the crowd surged, and Richard's booming voice stole attention once again. "Tonight," Richard declared from the stage, spotlight painting him in gold, "we honor vision, we honor ambition, we honor those bold enough to shape the future." His words rang hollow to Lillian, but the audience erupted in applause. Vanessa leaned close, kissed his cheek, and the cameras captured the moment like a coronation. Lillian felt her knees weaken. This was supposed to be their moment, her family's. Instead, she stood erased from her own story. The orchestra swelled, couples twirled across the dance floor, diamonds flashing with every spin. Outside, the wind thickened, waves slapping harder against the hull. The Atlantic murmured warnings no one cared to hear. Lillian slipped further toward the deck, craving air. She pressed her hands to the railing, the scent of salt cutting through the cloying perfume of the gala. For a fleeting second, she imagined escape, stepping off the yacht, leaving behind the cameras, the whispers, the betrayal. Freedom waited in the dark horizon, if only she were brave enough. But fate was swifter than choice. The champagne bottle shattered. Vanessa stumbled. A chain of gasps rippled through the crowd as sequins and silk blurred into panic. In seconds, two women toppled into the ocean, one carrying life, the other carrying vanity. The gala froze. Music died mid-note. Spotlights whirled over the waves. And as Richard Hale made his choice to leap after Vanessa, leaving his wife to the mercy of the sea, the gala became more than a party. It became a stage for ruin. The cameras that had glorified Richard's speeches now captured chaos. The same guests who cheered his ambition now whispered behind manicured hands. The whispers spread like wildfire. He saved the mistress. He left his wife. Though many would later claim they hadn't seen clearly, the truth was burned into memory. The setting that was meant to crown Richard Hale's greatness instead scripted his downfall. And high above the dark waves where Lillian fought for breath, Ethan Ward clenched the railing. His jaw tightened as he watched her struggle, the woman he once knew being erased before the world's eyes. He had stayed silent for years, watching her disappear into Richard's shadow. But in that moment, something shifted. The gala's lights burned brighter, but Ethan's resolve burned hotter. This was not the last time Richard Hale would humiliate Lillian Carter, but it would be the last time she faced it alone. Because what began on a glittering yacht in Miami would spiral into a reckoning neither Richard nor Vanessa could escape. Richard Hale was a man who believed in two things: appearances and ambition. To the world, he was the embodiment of success. A real estate mogul whose name appeared in Forbes, a man who could walk into any boardroom and silence rivals with a single smirk. But behind the polished image was something darker, something sharper. He had built his empire not just with strategy, but with ruthless calculation, stepping on anyone who slowed him down. For Richard, love was never about devotion. It was about utility. Lillian Carter had once been useful, an innocent beauty who softened his image, a devoted wife who polished his reputation as a family man. Investors loved the story of the self-made billionaire married to a gentle piano teacher. She made him relatable, approachable, even trustworthy. But as the years passed, usefulness was no longer enough. Richard wanted fire. Richard wanted spectacle. And he found it in Vanessa Brooks. Vanessa was everything Lillian was not. She was bold, unapologetic, and hungry. At 26, she had clawed her way from a small-town PR internship into the arms of one of the city's most powerful men. She understood the power of perception better than anyone. Every dress she wore, every laugh she delivered, every calculated touch of Richard's arm was a performance. Where Lillian brought quiet grace, Vanessa brought a storm designed to be noticed. To Richard, she was not just a lover, she was a weapon. With Vanessa on his arm, he felt unstoppable. She fueled his ego, whispered strategies into his ear, and dared him to take risks others called reckless. Together, they were a firestorm, destructive, intoxicating, and utterly careless of the ashes they left behind. That night on the yacht, as guests raised their glasses, Vanessa played her role to perfection. Her crimson gown shimmered under the chandeliers, her lips curved in a smile that was both invitation and provocation. Every gesture screamed possession. She wasn't just at Richard's side, she was staking her claim before the entire city. And Richard let her. He knew the whispers swirling through the crowd. Isn't his wife pregnant? Why is he parading that woman around? But he thrived on scandal. Attention, even negative, kept him relevant. For Richard, there was no such thing as bad press, only free publicity. If anything, humiliating Lillian in public sent a message. He wasn't bound by anyone's expectations, not even those of his own wife. Lillian, watching from the corner, had felt each gesture like a blade. But to Richard, her suffering wasn't tragedy, it was strategy. He thought she would endure it quietly, as she always had. He counted on her silence, her loyalty, her fear of scandal. He believed she would never fight back. Vanessa, however, took it further. She relished Lillian's pain. Every time their eyes met across the deck, Vanessa's smile widened, dripping with mockery. To her, Lillian was nothing but an obstacle, a relic of Richard's past. Vanessa wanted to erase her completely, to become not just his mistress but his wife, the woman photographed at his side in every headline. And she was not afraid to play dirty. Behind the scenes, Vanessa had begun planting seeds of manipulation. She whispered to Richard that Lillian was weak, fragile, unfit to stand beside a man destined for greatness. She spun stories about investors who doubted him because his wife lacked sophistication, about board members who questioned his judgment because he clung to a woman from a modest background. Whether these rumors were true didn't matter. Richard, drunk on ambition, believed her. The cruel irony was that Lillian carried his child, yet Vanessa convinced him that the child was a burden, a chain that would slow him down. "You need freedom, Richard," she purred one night, her hand tracing his jaw. "You need someone who pushes you forward, not someone who holds you back with diapers and bedtime stories." And Richard listened. That was why, when the Atlantic swallowed both women, his instincts were not to save the mother of his unborn child, but to rescue Vanessa, the woman who made him feel invincible. The cameras captured him clutching Vanessa like a hero, his soaked shirt clinging to his muscles, while Lillian sank into darkness. To the crowd, it was shocking. To Richard, it was natural. He had already chosen which future he wanted, and it wasn't the one with his wife. But what neither Richard nor Vanessa understood was that their arrogance had set a stage larger than themselves. The gala guests had seen, investors had whispered, cameras had clicked. In trying to showcase his power, Richard had revealed his cruelty. In trying to flaunt her victory, Vanessa had exposed her shamelessness. They thought they were untouchable, but reputations like empires can crumble overnight. In the days that followed, Richard doubled down. He visited Lillian in the hospital not out of love, but to control the narrative. "Keep quiet," he warned her, his tone more like a CEO addressing a liability than a husband speaking to a grieving wife. "If word gets out that I left you, it'll ruin everything. Think of the company. Think of the headlines." Vanessa, meanwhile, basked in the chaos. She played the victim in hushed tones to the press, pretending the fall had traumatized her, painting Richard as her savior. She knew sympathy would only secure her place at his side. Her crocodile tears, her trembling hands, every performance tightened her grip on him. To the outside world, they looked united, powerful, untouchable. But behind closed doors, their foundation was already cracking. Because while Richard and Vanessa schemed, they underestimated the woman they had discarded. They thought Lillian's silence meant defeat. They thought her pain would chain her forever. They thought the ocean had broken her. They were wrong. Even as Richard basked in false applause and Vanessa sharpened her claws, another force stirred quietly in the shadows. Ethan Ward, the man they had barely noticed, had seen everything. And unlike the crowd, he would not forget. Richard Hale and Vanessa Brooks believed they had buried Lillian Carter. But in truth, they had forged her. And when she rose, it would be their empire that drowned. The news broke before dawn. By the time sunlight spilled across Manhattan, headlines screamed the scandal that had unfolded on the glittering waters of Miami. Billionaire Richard Hale leaps to save Mistress during gala disaster. Pregnant wife struggles alone. Society gala turns to scandal. Who did Hale choose? Every tabloid, every morning show, every gossip column plastered the same images. Richard dragging a drenched Vanessa Brooks onto the yacht, her crimson gown clinging like a second skin, her hands clutched around his neck. His face, noble in profile, looked like the perfect hero's mask. But in the corner of one photo, blurred yet undeniable, was Lillian Carter's hand reaching out from the waves, moments before she slipped beneath. The public devoured it. Talk shows debated whether Richard had acted instinctively or selfishly. Social media raged with hashtags, Save Your Wife, Team Vanessa, Billionaire Scandal. The video, captured on a guest's phone, spread like wildfire. Vanessa screaming, Richard diving without hesitation, the spotlight illuminating everything, except the woman he left behind. By breakfast, Richard Hale's empire was on fire. At the hospital, Lillian lay pale and silent, her body weak, her soul bruised. The child she had dreamed of cradling was gone. But worse than the loss of her baby was the knowledge that the world now knew. She had been erased publicly, her humiliation televised, dissected, turned into entertainment. Strangers debated her worth on screens, judged her silence, mocked her fragility. When Richard arrived, flanked by his publicist, his first words weren't, "Are you all right?" They were, "We need to control the narrative." Lillian turned her face to the window, her eyes dry. She had no tears left. "Don't speak to the press," Richard continued, pacing. "They'll twist your words. Just stay quiet until this blows over. Vanessa and I." He caught himself, but the slip was already poison in the air. "I mean, we'll handle it," Lillian whispered. "We?" Richard sighed, as though she were the unreasonable one. "She nearly died, Lily. I couldn't just let her drown in front of everyone. Imagine the headlines if I hadn't acted. Investors would have panicked. It would have destroyed everything I've built." Her chest tightened. Not once had he mentioned their baby. Not once had he acknowledged her pain. To him, this wasn't tragedy. It was inconvenience. The door opened, and Vanessa swept in, a silk scarf wrapped around her damp hair, her eyes red but calculating. She gasped theatrically when she saw Lillian in bed. "Oh, Lillian, thank God you're all right," she breathed, clutching Richard's arm as though she might collapse without him. "We were so worried." The audacity made Lillian's stomach churn. Vanessa perched delicately on the chair beside Richard, her hand never leaving his sleeve. Every word was a performance, every glance angled as if cameras might be hidden in the walls. "We must all stay united," Vanessa said softly, squeezing Richard's hand. "The press loves a scandal, but if we show strength, if we stand together, they'll move on." United. Together. Lillian wanted to scream. She was the wife. She had carried his child. Yet here she sat, treated as the intruder in her own life, while the mistress dared to speak of unity. The humiliation burned deeper than salt water ever could. Later that evening, as Lillian was wheeled out of the hospital for tests, whispers followed her. Nurses glanced at their phones, eyes darting toward her belly, then back to her pale face. Some pitied her, others judged. One hushed voice muttered, "That's her. The wife he didn't save." The title clung to her like a scar. Back at the Hale townhouse, the nightmare worsened. Reporters camped outside the gates, flashbulbs bursting whenever a curtain twitched. Headlines multiplied. Rumors spread that Richard would divorce Lillian, that Vanessa was already moving into the penthouse. Editorials speculated whether a woman so weak could ever stand beside a man like Richard. Richard, furious at the negative press, blamed Lillian. "If you hadn't stumbled, none of this would have happened," he snapped one night, his tie loosened, his eyes bloodshot from whiskey. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for me?" Do you know how many calls I've had to take from shareholders? Lillian stared at him, numb. Our baby is gone. He froze for half a second, then looked away. You'll get over it. The words shattered something inside her. The next morning, the humiliation became complete. On the cover of a major magazine, splashed across every newsstand in the city, was the image of Richard and Vanessa leaving a charity dinner. He guided her into a limousine, his hand at the small of her back, his smile wide. The headline read, "Love triumphs over tragedy. Richard Hale and Vanessa Brooks, the city's new power couple." Lillian stood at the corner newsstand, the cold wind biting her cheeks as she stared at the glossy betrayal. Strangers passed, their eyes flicking from the magazine to her face. Some recognized her. A few shook their heads in pity. One whispered too loudly, "That's her. The one he left in the water." She felt stripped bare, her dignity auctioned to the highest bidder. That night, alone in the townhouse that felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage, Lillian collapsed on the floor of the nursery. The walls were painted soft lavender, tiny stars stenciled across the ceiling. The crib stood empty, mocking her. She pressed her forehead to the wooden bars, her body trembling. Her humiliation was complete. She had lost her child, she had lost her husband, and now, before the eyes of the world, she had lost her place as his wife. But in the silence of that nursery, something shifted. The humiliation that had broken her began to harden into resolve. She whispered to the emptiness, to the child she would never hold, "They think I'm weak. They think I'm finished. But they don't know me. They don't know what I'll become." Somewhere in the city, Ethan Ward sat in his office, watching the scandal unfold on his screens. His jaw tightened, his fist clenched. He remembered the girl with music in her soul, the woman who now sat broken on a nursery floor. And he swore to himself, this would not be her ending. For Richard and Vanessa, the humiliation was just a headline. For Lillian, it was the fire that would forge her rebirth. And when she rose, the world that mocked her would tremble. The Hale townhouse loomed like a mausoleum. Its marble floors gleamed, its chandeliers glittered, but every room was hollow, echoing with silence that mocked her. For years, Lillian had poured her soul into making this house a home. Fresh flowers on the dining table, music drifting from the piano, the faint smell of vanilla candles she lit every evening. Now the flowers withered in their vases, the piano was shut tight, and the air smelled only of loneliness. Her humiliation had been public, her grief was private, and both were unbearable. She spent hours in the nursery, the lavender walls pressing in on her like a cruel reminder. Tiny socks folded neatly in drawers, storybooks stacked beside the crib, a rocking chair waiting for lullabies that would never come. She traced the painted stars on the wall with trembling fingers, whispering to the child who was gone, "I'm sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have been stronger." But there was no reply, only silence, broken by the distant murmur of Richard's voice on the phone. Always Vanessa's name, always whispered laughter, always another betrayal echoing through the halls. Days blurred. Food lost its taste. Sleep came in broken fragments filled with nightmares of drowning, of reaching for Richard's hand and finding only emptiness. She woke with her chest aching, her body heavy as stone. Sometimes she didn't rise at all. Her friends, once vibrant threads in her life, had fallen away under Richard's influence. He had discouraged them, calling them distractions. Now, when she reached for her phone, her contact list felt like ghosts. Names she could dial, but voices she no longer trusted to answer. The world outside was merciless. Every magazine cover, every flashing screen seemed to scream her failure. Paparazzi lurked at the gates, waiting to capture her defeat. Headlines painted her as fragile, pitiful, irrelevant. She couldn't step outside without hearing whispers. That's her, the one he left in the ocean. Her collapse was total. One night, unable to bear the suffocating walls, she wandered barefoot through the townhouse, her gown trailing like a shadow. She found herself in the music room where her mother's piano sat untouched. She lowered herself onto the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys. For years, music had been her refuge. But when she pressed down, the sound cracked like her heart, hollow, broken, useless. She slammed the lid shut and buried her face in her hands. That was when Richard walked in. He smelled of expensive cologne and champagne, his tie loosened, his smile smug. Vanessa's lipstick still stained the collar of his shirt. He looked at Lillian not with love, not even with pity, but with irritation. "You can't keep moping like this," he said flatly, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "It's embarrassing. People are watching. Investors are nervous. Do you think I can run an empire with my wife crying on the floor like some tragic widow?" Lillian lifted her head slowly, her eyes red, her cheeks streaked with tears. "I lost our child, Richard." He swirled his drink, unimpressed. "And I lost $500 million in stock value this week. We all have burdens." The cruelty stunned her, but it no longer surprised her. She stared at him, hollow, realizing the man she had once loved had died long before their baby. What stood before her was a stranger who wore her husband's face but none of his soul. After he left, slamming the door behind him, Lillian collapsed on the floor. She pressed her palms to the cold marble, the tears flooding freely now. For the first time, she whispered the thought that had been growing like poison in her chest. "I can't survive this." The despair was a tide, pulling her under, drowning her in hopelessness. She curled against the floor, her breath ragged, her body trembling. Hours passed. The house swallowed her cries, just as the ocean once had. But in that silence, something unexpected happened. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, to the tiny house in Savannah. She saw her mother at the piano, smiling gently as she guided her hands over the keys. She heard her father's voice, steady and strong, telling her, "Lily, when life knocks you down, you don't stay down. You get up, you fight back." She remembered Juilliard, the way music had once made her feel invincible. She remembered laughter with friends, her younger self filled with dreams untarnished by betrayal. She remembered a boy named Ethan Ward, who used to sit in the back of rehearsal halls, clapping the loudest when she played, telling her she had a gift the world would never forget. And for the first time in weeks, Lillian's sobs slowed. She realized she had been measuring herself by Richard's shadow for too long. She had built her life around his ambition, his approval, his love. Without him, she thought she was nothing. But maybe, just maybe, his absence revealed the truth. She was more. She had always been more. Her body still ached, her heart still bled, but deep inside a spark flickered, weak, fragile, but alive. That night, she rose from the floor. She walked back to the nursery, placed her hand on the crib, and whispered, "I will not die here. I will not let him bury me." The collapse had been brutal, stripping her of everything. But in the ruins, the foundation of something new trembled awake. And outside, beyond the townhouse walls, forces were already shifting. Ethan Ward had begun making calls. He had seen the scandal, the betrayal, the humiliation. And unlike Richard, Ethan had not forgotten who Lillian truly was. Her collapse was not the end. It was the silence before the storm. And soon, Richard and Vanessa would learn that the woman they left to drown was not gone. She was only gathering strength. The storm had stripped her down to nothing. But sometimes it takes ruin to prepare the ground for rebirth. Lillian Carter had collapsed, but she was still breathing. And somewhere in the heart of Manhattan, someone else was watching. Someone who had not forgotten the girl she once was. Ethan Ward. The world knew him as the enigmatic CEO of Ward Technologies, a self-made billionaire who turned a garage startup into an empire that powered half the country's digital backbone. But long before the headlines, long before the wealth, he had been Ethan. The boy who sat in the back of Juilliard's practice rooms, listening to Lillian's fingers dance across ivory keys. He had loved her then, quietly, fiercely, knowing she belonged to someone else. And when she married Richard Hale, Ethan had stepped aside, swallowing his own heart. But he had never stopped watching from the shadows, never stopped admiring the music that had once filled entire halls with emotion. When the scandal broke, when the images of Richard saving Vanessa while Lillian vanished beneath the waves flooded every screen, Ethan felt a fury he had buried for years ignite like wildfire. He remembered the girl who had once made him believe in beauty, and he knew he could not stay silent any longer. 3 nights after the accident, Lillian sat alone in the townhouse library, surrounded by shelves of books she had never read. Richard was gone again, no doubt with Vanessa draped across his arm at some exclusive rooftop bar. The house creaked with emptiness, the kind that pressed down like a weight on her chest. A knock startled her, sharp, firm. She hesitated. Richard never knocked. When she opened the door, Ethan stood there. He was taller than she remembered, his frame broader, his presence commanding in the quiet night. His suit was sharp, his expression sharper, but his eyes, the same steady hazel eyes she had known years ago, softened the moment they landed on her. "Lily," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying her name like a promise. Her breath caught. For the first time in weeks, she felt her knees tremble not from grief, but from recognition. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping across the hollow house. "I saw the news. The whole world saw the news." His jaw tightened. "I couldn't stay away." Tears welled before she could stop them. She turned, embarrassed, pressing her fingers to her face. "You shouldn't have come. You don't know what it's like." "I know exactly what it's like," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "I watched a man choose a performance over the woman who gave him everything. I saw the way he left you. And I won't let him erase you, Lily. Not again." The words cracked something inside her. For so long she had been invisible, her pain dismissed, her worth diminished. And now, here was someone who saw her, not as a liability, not as a shadow, but as herself. She sank into a chair, her body trembling. "It's over, Ethan. My baby is gone. My marriage is gone. And the world thinks I'm pathetic." He crouched before her, his eyes locking onto hers with a fire she hadn't seen in years. "The world doesn't decide who you are. He doesn't decide who you are. You do." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to, but despair clung to her like chains. "I don't have the strength," Ethan's voice softened. "You do. You just don't see it yet. But I do. I always have." Silence filled the room, thick and fragile. For the first time since the accident, Lillian let herself breathe fully. Then Ethan reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. "There's something you need to know." She frowned, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside were documents, photos, reports, each page a blade. Financial statements, property transfers, emails, proof of Richard's schemes. "He's been moving assets into Vanessa's name," Ethan explained, his voice calm but lethal. "Shell companies, hidden accounts. He's preparing to cut you out completely." Lillian's chest tightened. The betrayal was deeper than she'd imagined. He's planning to leave me with nothing." "Yes," Ethan said. "But he underestimated you. He underestimated that you're not alone anymore." Her eyes lifted to his. "Why are you doing this for me?" For a moment, Ethan hesitated. Then his voice dropped, raw and unguarded. "Because I should have fought for you years ago. Because I let him take you from me. And because I won't make that mistake again." The room spun. She pressed her hand to her lips, overwhelmed by the weight of his confession, by the truth that had lived in his eyes all along. For the first time since the ocean swallowed her, hope flickered, small, fragile, but alive. She whispered, "What do I do?" Ethan leaned closer, his words deliberate, each one a seed of fire. "You rise, you stop hiding, you show the world who Lillian Carter really is, and when you're ready, we'll bring him down, together." Her hands trembled as she touched the folder again, the evidence that Richard's empire was built on betrayal. She thought of the nursery, the lavender walls, the empty crib. She thought of the humiliation, the headlines, the whispers, and slowly her grief began to twist into something sharper. Resolve. Richard had taken her child, her dignity, her voice, but she was still alive. And now she was no longer alone. She met Ethan's gaze, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "All right, let's burn his world down." Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of triumph but of recognition. "That's the Lillian I remember." In that moment, the collapse ended. The twist had begun. For Richard Hale, the choice he made on that yacht was the beginning of his empire's undoing. For Vanessa Brooks, the smug smile she wore that night would become her undoing. Because what they thought was victory was only the calm before a storm they could never contain. And at the center of that storm was Lillian Carter. No longer the forgotten wife, no longer the fragile woman drowning in despair. She was rising. And with Ethan Ward at her side, the reckoning was inevitable. The old Lillian Carter had drowned the night Richard Hale leapt into the water for another woman. The fragile wife, the grieving mother, the invisible figure in her husband's empire, she was gone. What rose from those ashes was someone different, someone sharper, someone who no longer begged for love but demanded respect. It began quietly. After Ethan's visit, the documents he left sat on the library table like silent weapons. Each page exposed Richard's deceit, hidden accounts, offshore transfers, fraudulent contracts. For 2 days, Lillian stared at them, fear battling fury. But the more she studied the proof, the more her sorrow twisted into purpose. If Richard thought she would be erased, he was wrong. On the third morning, she opened the curtains of the townhouse for the first time in weeks. Sunlight streamed in, blinding at first but warm, alive. She caught her reflection in the window, pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, a ghost. She didn't recognize herself, and that realization cut deeper than any headline. She whispered into the silence, "No more." The first step was her appearance. For years, Richard had dictated how she dressed. Soft colors, conservative cuts, gowns that made her a background ornament. Lillian drove herself to Fifth Avenue, ignoring the paparazzi that swarmed her car. Inside a high-end boutique, she faced the mirror as a stylist draped her in a fitted black dress, sharp lines hugging her frame. She let her hair fall in loose waves instead of the restrained bun Richard always demanded. Red lipstick, bold and unapologetic, stained her mouth. When she looked again, she didn't see the forgotten wife. She saw a woman stepping into her own spotlight. The next step was reclaiming her voice. Ethan arranged a discreet meeting at one of his private offices in Midtown. Inside the glass tower overlooking the city, Lillian spread Richard's documents across the table. Ethan watched as she moved with newfound focus, her fingers tracing numbers, her mind sharp. "He thinks I don't understand finance," she said, her voice steady. "He always told me to leave the business to him, but I see it now. Every lie, every transfer." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good, because knowledge is power, Lily, and you're holding enough to destroy him." She lifted her chin, a spark igniting in her eyes. "Then let's make sure he never sees it coming." But transformation wasn't only about strategy. It was about reclaiming life. One evening, Lillian returned to her piano. For weeks it had been silent, a coffin for the music that once defined her. She sat at the bench, her hands trembling, then pressed a single key. The note rang out, fragile but pure. She pressed another, and another. Soon the room filled with a melody, haunting, broken, but alive. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't only of sorrow. They were of rebirth. Ethan, listening from the doorway, felt his chest tighten. The girl he once knew was returning, but she was different now, stronger, forged by fire. Word of her change spread quietly. When paparazzi captured her leaving a boutique in that sharp black dress, headlines shifted. From tragedy to triumph, Lillian Carter steps out in stunning new look. Is Richard Hale's wife preparing for a comeback? Public sympathy that once painted her as pitiful now began to twist into admiration. The narrative was changing, and Richard had no control over it. Meanwhile, Richard spiraled. His stock continued to plummet, investors whispered doubts, and Vanessa, though still at his side, grew restless. She hadn't expected Lillian to survive, let alone rise from humiliation with a power that threatened them both. One evening, Richard confronted Lillian at the townhouse. He stormed into the library, eyes blazing, Vanessa trailing behind in a silk robe. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped, slamming a magazine onto the table. On the cover was Lillian in her new dress, walking with her head high, Ethan discreetly at her side. "You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing this family." Lillian looked up calmly from her papers. "What family, Richard?" The words cut sharper than knives. Vanessa sneered, stepping forward. "You think a dress and some makeup make you powerful? You're still the woman he left in the water." Lillian rose slowly, her gaze locking onto Vanessa's with unflinching fire. "Yes, he left me, and I survived. But do you know what survival does, Vanessa? It makes you fearless, and you," she let her eyes sweep Vanessa's trembling frame, "are nothing without him." For the first time, Vanessa faltered, her smile cracking. Richard slammed his fist against the table. "Don't test me, Lillian. You'll lose." But Lillian didn't flinch. She leaned closer, her voice low but lethal. "I already lost everything, Richard. You can't break someone who's already been broken, and that makes me more dangerous than you'll ever be." Silence hung heavy. Richard's jaw clenched, but beneath his fury was something else, fear. That night, as he stormed out, Vanessa clinging to his arm, Ethan emerged from the shadows of the library. "You didn't just stand up to him," he said softly. "You declared war." Lillian exhaled, her hands trembling but her eyes steady. "Good. Let him come. I'm ready." The transformation was complete. She was no longer Richard Hale's silent wife. She was Lillian Carter, reborn, relentless, and prepared to reclaim everything stolen from her. The city that once pitied her now waited for her next move. The empire that had tried to erase her now trembled at her return. And Richard Hale, the man who thought he had buried her, would soon realize the truth. He hadn't drowned Lillian Carter. He had awakened her. The night of the Winter Charity Gala arrived like a storm cloaked in glitter. The ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria shimmered under cascading chandeliers, every inch dripping with wealth and vanity. The city's elite crowded the hall, their diamonds flashing, their conversations a chorus of ambition. It was the kind of event Richard Hale lived for, an opportunity to display power, to remind the world he was untouchable. But tonight, the stage he built would become his ruin. Richard entered with Vanessa Brooks clinging to his arm, her crimson gown echoing the night of the yacht. The cameras devoured them. To the press, they were still the scandalous pair, the couple who dared to flaunt love born from betrayal. Richard thrived in it, smiling broadly, waving as if he had conquered the headlines rather than drowned in them. Vanessa pressed closer, whispering sweet nothings crafted more for the audience than for him. Yet among the crowd, whispers had shifted. "Have you seen her?" a woman murmured to her companion. "She's here tonight?" "Lillian Carter?" the man replied, eyes widening. "Yes, and she looks different." The air tightened with anticipation. Every scandal-hungry guest craned their necks toward the grand staircase, and then she appeared. Lillian descended slowly, each step deliberate, her gown a cascade of black silk threaded with silver that shimmered like starlight. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her lips painted a fierce crimson. The woman they once pitied was gone. In her place stood a vision of strength, beauty, and unshakable resolve. Cameras snapped wildly, gasps rippled across the ballroom. Richard froze, his smirk faltered, his jaw tightening. For the first time in months, he looked rattled. Vanessa's grip on his arm stiffened. Lillian reached the final step and paused, letting the silence envelop her. She raised her chin, eyes scanning the crowd before landing squarely on Richard. A faint smile touched her lips. Not warm, not forgiving, but sharp as a blade. Ethan Ward stepped beside her. Dressed in a midnight suit that radiated quiet authority, he offered his arm, and Lillian took it. Together, they walked into the lion's den. Two figures who commanded the room without needing to speak. The whispers grew louder. "She's with Ethan Ward? The billionaire? Oh, this is war." Richard clenched his fists. His empire was already cracking, his investors questioning his judgment. Now, seeing his wife, no, his ex-wife in everything but paperwork, standing radiant beside his greatest business rival, was a humiliation he hadn't calculated for. The evening unfolded in glittering excess. Wine poured, violins played, speeches droned. But tension built with every passing minute, everyone waiting for the collision they knew was inevitable. It came when the host called Richard to the stage. He rose confidently, dragging Vanessa with him, and adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice polished, "tonight is about generosity, about building futures." "Funny," Lillian's voice rang clear across the hall, cutting through the applause. "You speak of building futures when you destroyed mine." The room stilled. Cameras whirred, flashes erupted. Richard froze, his grip tightening on the podium. "Lillian," he hissed through clenched teeth, "sit down." But she didn't. She stepped forward, Ethan beside her, and mounted the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, eyes wide, hungry for blood. Lillian faced the audience, her posture regal, her voice unwavering. "Months ago, this man left me to drown while he saved another woman. He let me lose my child. He humiliated me before the world." Her eyes swept the stunned faces. "And while you all debated whether it was instinct or betrayal, he was transferring millions into offshore accounts, hiding assets, preparing to discard me completely." Gasps rippled. Journalists scribbled furiously, microphones thrust forward. Ethan stepped up, his voice calm but deadly. "I have documents that prove it. Shell companies in Vanessa Brooks's name, fraudulent contracts, embezzlement masked as philanthropy. Richard Hale's empire isn't built on vision, it's built on deceit." The ballroom erupted. Voices clashed, cameras flashed, guests surged forward to catch every word. Richard's face drained of color. "That's a lie," he roared, slamming his fist on the podium. "She's bitter. She's—" "Don't," Lillian cut in sharply, her voice slicing through his fury. "Don't you dare call me bitter for speaking the truth. You left me in the ocean, Richard. You left our child. You can deny your crimes, but you can't erase what the world saw. Vanessa tried to step forward, her voice trembling. This is ridiculous. She's just... Lillian turned, her gaze pinning her like a dagger. You think wearing his arm makes you powerful? You're nothing but a pawn. He'll discard you the moment you stop being useful, just like he tried to discard me. The words hit harder than any slap. Vanessa's face crumbled, her mask of superiority cracking under the weight of truth. Richard lunged toward Lillian, rage boiling, but Ethan moved instantly, intercepting him with a steady hand on his chest. The two men locked eyes, silence thick with unspoken challenge. Richard faltered, not because he feared Ethan's strength, but because for the first time, he saw the room wasn't with him. The crowd was with her. Flashes blinded him, reporters shouted questions, guests muttered condemnation. Years of carefully crafted reputation unraveled in minutes. The king had been dethroned, not in private, but under chandeliers and cameras. Lillian didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply looked at Richard one final time, her eyes calm, her voice soft but devastating. You thought you buried me, but all you did was set me free. She stepped down from the stage, Ethan's hands steady at her back. The ballroom erupted into chaos behind them, reporters swarming Richard, Vanessa sobbing, investors storming out. But Lillian walked forward, unshaken, her head high. Her revenge was not a scream. It was not a fight. It was truth revealed in the one place Richard valued most, public perception. And in that world, he was finished. The woman he had left in the ocean had risen, and tonight, she drowned him instead. The fallout from the Winter Charity Gala rippled across the city like an earthquake. Overnight, Richard Hale's empire crumbled. Investors pulled out, boards resigned, headlines shifted from admiration to condemnation. Hale exposed Mistress, fraud, and betrayal. From mogul to monster, Richard Hale's public downfall. The video of the confrontation went viral. Millions watched as Lillian Carter, once dismissed as fragile, stood tall before the cameras, her voice steady, her truth undeniable. In living rooms and offices across America, people cheered. Mothers who had been abandoned, wives who had been betrayed, daughters who had been silenced. They saw themselves in her. Richard's attempts to fight back only worsened the damage. Each denial was met with another leaked document, another piece of evidence. His lawyers scrambled, but the walls closed in fast. Federal investigators launched inquiries. Whispers of indictments grew louder. Vanessa Brooks, once smug in her stolen spotlight, found herself shunned. Friends stopped answering calls, sponsors withdrew invitations. She had been Richard's trophy, and when his crown shattered, so did her status. Paparazzi captured her storming out of his penthouse, mascara streaked, screaming. The woman who mocked Lillian had become a footnote in Richard's ruin. Meanwhile, Lillian walked through the city with her head unbowed. For months, she had hidden behind curtains, shrinking from whispers. Now, people stopped her on the street not with pity, but with respect. Some hugged her, some whispered, "Thank you." She realized she had become more than a victim. She was a symbol. But victory wasn't just about destroying Richard. It was about reclaiming herself. In the weeks following the gala, Ethan Ward remained steadfast at her side. Not as her savior, but as her ally. Together, they met with lawyers, securing her rightful share of Richard's assets. With Ethan's guidance, she set up the Carter Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting women abandoned or silenced, women who needed voices as fierce as hers had become. The first press conference for the foundation was held in a modest hall, not a glittering ballroom. Lillian stood at the podium, her black dress replaced by a simple navy suit, her hands steady on the wood. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded, but her voice rang clear. "This isn't just my story," she said. "It belongs to every woman who has been left behind, dismissed, forgotten. I lost a child, I lost a marriage, but I did not lose myself. And tonight I tell every woman watching, you don't have to drown, you can rise." The applause thundered. That night, sitting alone in her apartment overlooking the city, Lillian finally allowed herself to breathe. For so long she had been defined by grief and betrayal. Now she felt something unfamiliar but welcome, peace. Yet there was one final chapter to close. Weeks later, she received a call from her lawyer. Richard had agreed to a meeting. He wanted to see her. Against her better judgment, she agreed. Not for reconciliation, there was none, but for closure. The meeting took place in a sterile law office, the city skyline looming behind tall windows. Richard sat across the table, his once commanding presence dimmed. His hair was unkempt, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. For the first time in years, he looked small. "Lillian," he began, his voice cracking, "I made a mistake." She almost laughed. "A mistake?" "No. Drowning your wife, erasing her, stealing from her. That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." "You didn't make one mistake, Richard," she said calmly. "You made hundreds, and you chose them, one after another." He flinched but pressed on. "I lost everything. The company, the money, Vanessa, all gone. But you," his eyes flickered desperate, "you could still come back. We could start over." Lillian leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Start over? You left me in the ocean. You let me lose our child, and then you paraded another woman through my grief. Do you think forgiveness erases that?" Richard swallowed hard. "I regret it every day." "Good," she replied simply. "Live with that regret, because I don't regret leaving you." She stood, sliding the divorce papers across the table. "This is the last time we speak. Goodbye, Richard." As she walked out, she felt lighter than she had in years. Behind her, Richard slumped, drowning now, not in water, but in the consequences of his own choices. Outside the building, Ethan was waiting. He didn't ask what had been said. He didn't need to. He simply offered his arm, and she took it. Weeks turned into months. The Carter Foundation flourished, helping countless women find their voices again. Lillian filled her apartment with music once more, her piano echoing with strength rather than sorrow. She still grieved her child, but she no longer carried the grief alone. One evening, Ethan invited her to a rooftop overlooking the city. The skyline glowed, the air crisp with spring. He handed her a glass of wine, his eyes steady, his smile soft. "You've built something incredible," he said. "Not just the foundation, yourself." She looked at him, her heart steady for the first time in a long time. "I couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head. "You always had it in you, Lily. I just reminded you." Silence stretched between them, warm and unspoken. Then, softly, she whispered, "Maybe it's time I stopped surviving and started living." Ethan reached for her hand. "Then let's live." For the first time in years, she let herself smile. Not for cameras, not for survival, but for herself. The city lights shimmered below, but they no longer felt like prisons of wealth and scandal. They felt like stars, guiding her toward a future she had claimed with her own strength. Richard Hale faded into headlines of disgrace. Vanessa Brooks disappeared into obscurity. But Lillian Carter rose higher than either had ever imagined. The woman who was left to drown had not only survived, she had rebuilt. She had reclaimed, she had risen. And her story closed not with loss, but with triumph. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, but healing. And Lillian Carter had done both. So that's how the story comes to an end, my dear friends. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in Lillian's journey touched your heart in a way that words can hardly explain. Maybe it was the pain of betrayal, maybe it was the strength she found in the middle of despair. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's exactly what this story reminds us. Healing doesn't come from those who hurt us. It comes from the courage we choose to build inside ourselves. No matter how deep you've fallen, you can rise again. And if this story gave you even a little spark of hope or reflection, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep walking through these powerful stories together.
Thomas Vance smiled as the pen hit the paper. With one clean signature, his divorce was final. He felt a literal weight lift from his shoulders. He looked across the polished mahogany table at Elena, his wife of 10 years, now his ex-wife. She was a ghost, a gray mouse staring at her hands. He had won. He kept the company, the multi-million-dollar house, the future. She kept her, well, whatever it was she did. As he pushed his chair back triumphant, he saw a black sedan pull up outside. Then he watched his smile frozen as Elena stood and the car door opened. A man stepped out. Not just any man. Julian Thorne, the billionaire. Thomas's smile didn't just fade. It shattered. Thomas Vance lived his life at a victorious 9,000-foot altitude, and tonight he was soaring. The occasion was the annual Metropolitan Tech Gala, a glittering affair of black ties and venture capital. Thomas, in a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars, was the undisputed center of gravity. His company, Vance Solutions, was the city's darling. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a visionary. "The key is predictive agility, gentlemen," Thomas said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. He swirled a glass of 18-year-old Macallan, the ice clinking like a small bell. His audience, 2 hedge fund managers and a rival CEO, hung on every word. "Anyone can read the present. We at Vance Solutions, we sell the future." Across the ballroom, his new girlfriend Tiffany, a 24-year-old influencer with a $1 million smile and 2 million followers, waved a manicured hand. She was draped in a crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination and everything to the social media post. He'd be joining her later after he was done being brilliant. "It's incredible, Tom," said one of the fund managers, a man named Blevins. "Your Vance engine, it's black magic. Black. It hasn't missed a market projection in 3 years. How do you do it?" Thomas smiled. "A magician never reveals his secrets. Let's just say I see the patterns others miss." "And your wife, Elena?" Blevins asked, taking a sip. "She's not here tonight." Thomas let out a short, patronizing laugh. "Ah, Elena. No, galas aren't her scene. You know how it is. She's brilliant, of course, but domestic. She's happier at home tinkering with her spreadsheets, I think." The men chuckled. They all knew the type. The ball-and-chain academic wife who didn't understand the high-stakes world they inhabited. They clapped Thomas on the back, the unspoken consensus clear. Thomas Vance was a titan burdened with a gray, unglamorous partner. What none of them knew was that at that exact moment the titan's phone was vibrating. He'd been ignoring the texts for an hour. "Elena Thomas, the data from Gentech is flawed. Elena, the sensor ratings from their Singapore hub are ghosting. It's not a supply issue, it's a hardware failure. You're getting false negatives." "Elena, Thomas, are you there? Their CEO is at the gala. He's going to pull the contract if you give him the wrong data." Thomas had finally glanced at the last text, annoyed. "Handling it, L. Stop buzzing my phone. You're being dramatic." Now he saw the CEO of Gentech Pharma, a formidable man named Dr. Eris, heading his way. Eris did not look happy. "Vance," Eris said, skipping the pleasantries. "I'm hearing whispers. My team says your Vance engine is projecting a 40% downturn in our Q4 logistics. We're about to sink $100 million into a new distribution hub based on that. I'm getting cold feet. Convince me." Thomas froze. This was the client. The $50 million a year contract that had made Vance Solutions. His mind went blank. He didn't know the data. He just sold it. He stammered, "Well, Eris, the projections, the agility." Eris's eyes narrowed. "I'm not paying you for agility, Tom. I'm paying you for answers." Thomas's hands, slick with sweat, gripped his phone under the table. He fumbled opening the text chain from Elena. He squinted at her last message. "Elena, tell him to check the diagnostic logs on server SG-1488. The humidity sensor is fried. It's causing a cascade failure that looks like a supply drop. It's not a $100 problem, it's a $1,000 part. He's fine. Tell him." Thomas cleared his throat. He looked up, his confidence a mask he'd worn for so long it had become his face snapping back into place. "Eris," he said, his voice suddenly sharp and precise. "Your problem isn't your supply chain. It's your hardware. Specifically the humidity sensor on your server at the Singapore hub ID SG-1488. It's fried. It's causing a data cascade that's ghosting your inventory. You don't need a new $100 million hub. You need a $1,000 part and a new IT guy." The blood drained from Dr. Eris's face. He snapped his fingers at a nearby aide. "Get Singapore on the line. Get me a diagnostic on server 1488, now." Eris stared at Thomas, his suspicion replaced by a profound, almost fearful respect. How, in God's name, could you know that? Thomas Vance leaned in a wolfish grin playing on his lips. Like I said, Eris, I see the patterns. He accepted the thunderous clap on the back, took another sip of his Macallan, and didn't look at his phone again. Later that night at 2 a.m., he stumbled into his sprawling minimalist mansion. The glass and steel monstrosity had been featured in Architectural Digest, a testament to his success. Tiffany was passed out in the cab, having drunk too much pink champagne. He found Elena where he always found her, in her studio. It was the one room he hadn't upgraded. It was a mess of servers' whiteboards covered in what looked like gibberish and half-empty cups of tea. She was asleep at her desk, her head pillowed on a keyboard, her glasses askew. She looked small, worn out. Elle, he said, nudging her shoulder. Elle, wake up. You can't sleep in here. It's unprofessional. She startled awake, pushing her hair back. Thomas, you're home. Did you talk to Dr. Eris? Was it okay? Okay. Thomas laughed, unbuttoning his tuxedo. It was perfect. You should have seen his face, Elle. You were right. That sensor thing, brilliant. He thought I was a god. He tossed his jacket onto a stack of her research papers. Oh, good, she said, her voice quiet with relief. I was so worried. Yeah, well, you worry too much, he said, patting her on the head. It was the gesture one gives a loyal dog. You'll never believe the night I had. Blevins is in. He's upping his stake. I'm going to be bigger than ever. He looked around the room, a wave of disgust washing over him. We really need to clean this place up, Elle. It's a fire hazard. And Tiffany is coming over for brunch tomorrow. I don't want her seeing all this. Your little hobby is getting out of hand. Elena looked up at him. Her eyes, which he'd always thought of as dull, mousy brown, were still. There was no anger, no exhaustion, just a profound, unsettling clarity. A hobby, she repeated. It wasn't a question. You know what I mean, he said, waving dismissively. The code stuff. It's great. It helps me. But it's cluttered. Anyway, I'm going to bed. Lock up. He walked out whistling. He didn't see her hand move to her desk drawer. He didn't see her pull out a small encrypted hard drive. And he didn't see her turn back to the screen where a single secure chat window was open. The contact name was simple JT. Her message was 2 words. He's home. The reply was instantaneous. The legal team is on standby. The jet is fueled. Are you sure, Elena? She looked at the $500 tuxedo jacket crumpled on her priceless doctoral thesis. She thought of him calling her a hobby. She thought of the other woman asleep in a taxi outside her house. She typed, I'm sure. He's cutting out the cancer. I'm just making sure he doesn't take the healthy tissue with him. Elena Petrova had not been a gray mouse for her entire life. She had been a supernova. At 22, she was the undisputed, undefeated champion of the MIT Code Jam, a legendary 72-hour competition of coding and endurance. In her final year, she was the last one standing, her screen a blur of elegant, impossibly fast script. Her final opponent, a 30-year-old hotshot tech millionaire who had entered on a whim, finally threw his hands up in defeat at hour 68. That man was Julian Thorne. He'd found her afterward drinking a Red Bull and checking her work. I've never seen code like that, he'd said, his voice raw with exhaustion and awe. It's not just efficient, it's predictive. How? She'd looked up, her eyes bright with caffeine and genius. You're all using brute force. You're trying to answer the question. I'm just teaching the machine to understand the question better. It's a protocol I'm working on. The Petrova protocol. He had offered her a job on the spot. A blank check. A lab. Anything she wanted. She had turned him down. That's incredibly kind, Mr. Thorne. But I'm getting married. Julian had blinked. Married to who? Another engineer? A physicist? No. She'd blushed. He's in business. Thomas Vance. He's a visionary. He's going to build a company and I'm going to help him. Julian Thorne, a man who saw patterns in everything, had looked at this brilliant, naive young woman and had given her a warning. Ms. Petrova, Elena, a rocket engine is designed to go to space. You can't put it in a Toyota Camry and expect it to do anything but tear the car and itself to pieces. Don't let him ground you. As a wedding gift, he'd sent a strange antique kryptonite brand high-security lock. The note read, "Don't ever let anyone less intelligent than you set the combination." She'd kept it. For 10 years, she'd been Julian's rocket engine trying to power Thomas's Toyota Camry. And it had, just as Julian predicted, torn her to pieces. Thomas hadn't stolen her work. Not at first. He'd borrowed it. "Elle, I just need a little Vance magic for this presentation." "Elle, can you run the numbers for this, just your hobby code?" Her hobby was in fact the Petrova Protocol v3.0, an adaptive self-learning AI that could model markets, predict hardware failures, and analyze data with terrifying accuracy. The Vance engine he sold to clients. It was a clunky, outdated interface. He'd paid a team of developers to build a dashboard that he could understand that sat on top of her work. He was the slick salesman. She was the entire factory. He'd convinced her it was teamwork. He'd convinced her she needed him. "You'd hate this, Elle. It's all schmoozing. It's a performance. You're the art. I'm the stage." He'd isolated her. He'd moved her off payroll 3 years ago. "It's for tax purposes, baby," he'd purred. "We're a family-owned asset. It's simpler. You're an unpaid spousal partner. It protects you." She'd believed him. Until 3 months ago. She had been updating their shared family calendar on the kitchen iPad. And she'd seen the reservations. Maldives, 2 weeks. Presidential overwater bungalow. For Tiffany Hayes. Her blood had run cold. It wasn't the affair that shocked her. It was the banality of it, the cliché. Then she dug. Elena, the architect of the most sophisticated predictive engine on Earth, turned her gaze inward. She'd used her own protocol to scan his life. She found the texts, the ones he thought he'd deleted. Tiffany. She's so dull. What do you even talk about? Thomas, nothing. We don't. She's my unambitious burden. But I need her to keep the engine running. 1 more year. Then I'll cut the cord, buy her a condo, and we're free. An unambitious burden. She had sat there in the dark, the white light of the iPad illuminating a decade of lies. The stage wasn't there to present the art. It was there to hide it. He wasn't protecting her. He was imprisoning her. He was a parasite. And he was about to cut the cord. She hadn't cried. She had acted. Her first call was to Julian Thorne. It was 4 a.m. He'd picked up on the first ring. "Julian," she'd said, her voice a whisper, "the Toyota is on fire and the driver is trying to take me down with it. Is that job offer still open?" There was a pause. "For you, Elena, always. My team will be in touch by sunrise. Welcome to Aegis Innovations." Her second call was to a lawyer Julian's team recommended. A shark named Ms. Albright. "He's filed for divorce," Elena told her 2 weeks later. "He's offering me an insulting lump sum, my car, and my hobby materials." Ms. Albright had smiled. "Oh, that's perfect. We'll take it. We're not fighting." "Oh, heavens no, Ms. Petrova. We're not fighting. We're accepting. With one tiny addition." The plan was simple. It was brutal. It was elegant. It was hers. For the last 3 months, while Thomas was at galas and planning his escape to the Maldives, Elena was migrating. She wasn't just backing up the Petrova protocol, she was moving it, piece by piece in tiny encrypted data packets hidden inside Vance Solutions' own outgoing data reports to clients. She smuggled her entire life's work off Thomas's servers. The code left on his system was a shell. A demo version, as Julian had called it. It was the V3.0, clumsy and old. The real work, the V6.0, the one she'd been building in secret for 2 years, was being reassembled on a privately owned, air-gapped server farm in a secure Swiss data bunker in Zurich, one owned by Aegis Innovations. The kryptonite lock Julian had given her, it sat on the main server rack in her studio. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical key. It was the manual override. When she left this house, she would turn that key. And the Vance engine, the black magic Thomas sold, would be nothing but an empty box. He thought he was cutting her off. He had no idea. She was the one holding the scalpel. The conference room at DeWitt Gable & Klein was a monument to old-world power. The mahogany table was a single 30-foot slab of wood polished to a mirror finish. The air smelled of floor wax and 100-year-old money. Thomas was in his element. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by his lawyer, Harrison. Harrison was a bulldog, a man who billed $1,500 an hour to tear families apart and enjoyed his work. On the other side, lost in the shadow, sat Elena and her lawyer, Ms. Albright. Ms. Albright was a scalpel. She was tiny, wore a simple, unflashy suit, and hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. "So we are in agreement." Harrison boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "My client, Mr. Vance, in his magnanimity retains 100% of the Vance Solutions corporate entity, the marital home in Greenwich, and the full stock portfolio. Mrs. Vance, soon to be Ms. Petrova, will receive a one-time lump sum payout of $500,000, the 2018 Volvo she currently drives, and—" Harrison squinted at the paper. "And all personal effects and intellectual property created by her unrelated to Vance Solutions operations." He looked up at Ms. Albright. That's the clause you added." Ms. Albright nodded, her hands folded. "That is correct." Harrison glanced at Thomas and stifled a laugh. You're sure you don't want to? I don't know. Ask for the dog." Thomas chuckled, a rich, condescending sound. Now, Harrison, let her have her knitting patterns. It's fine." He looked at Elena. His expression was a masterpiece of practiced patronizing sympathy. Truly, I wish you the best. I hope this is enough for you to, get a fresh start." Elena's face was a perfect, impassive mask. She hadn't looked at him once. She just stared at her hands folded in her lap. The perfect beaten gray mouse, Thomas thought. God, this was easy. He was almost giddy. He was free. He was untethered. He'd just saved himself from a 50-50 split that would have cost him tens of millions. He'd bought his freedom for $500,000 and a 2018 Volvo. He was by any measure a genius. "Right then," Harrison said, sliding the thick stack of papers toward Elena. "Ms. Petrova, if you'd sign." Ms. Albright put a hand on the document. "One moment." She produced a fresh sheet of paper. "A small addendum which I'm sure Mr. Vance won't mind. It's just a clarification of the personal projects clause. It specifically names one of those projects, a Petrova protocol, as her exclusive property. A formality, you understand." Thomas burst out laughing. She was trying to take her hobby. This was priceless. "The Petrova protocol," he repeated, his voice dripping with amusement. That thing you scribble about in your notebooks, by all means, L. You can have it. God knows I can't make heads or tails of it. It's probably worth tens of dollars." "Sign it, Harrison," Thomas said, waving his hand. Let's get this done. I have a 1:00 p.m. reservation at the Capitol Grill." Harrison shrugged, initialed the addendum, and pushed the stack. Elena picked up the pen. Her hand was perfectly steady. She signed Elena Petrova in a clear, strong script. The stack was pushed to Thomas. He took his own custom-engraved Mont Blanc pen. He looked at Elena, who finally looked up at him. Her eyes were unreadable. He gave her a slow, pitying wink. And then, with a flourish, Thomas Vance smiled as the pen hit the paper. He signed his name with the practiced confidence of a king. And with that, Harrison boomed, "All matters are concluded. Mr. Vance, Ms. Petrova, you are divorced." Thomas snapped his briefcase shut. He stood adjusting the cuffs of his $5,000 suit. He felt 10 pounds lighter. He felt victorious. "Elena," he said, the picture of magnanimity. "No hard feelings, eh? I'll have my assistant coordinate the removal of your things from the studio by end of day. I'm sure you'll be more comfortable in wherever you're going." "Thank you, Thomas," she said. Her voice was level, almost light. "You have no idea." He strode out of the conference room, Harrison at his side, the bulldog already on his phone, no doubt racking up his next bill. Thomas was composing a text. To Tiffany. Subject, "It's done. The anchor is cut. Get the champagne ready. The real stuff." He was so busy basking in the glow of his own brilliance that he didn't notice Elena and Ms. Albright hadn't followed him into the elevator. They had in fact stayed behind for one final piece of business. As the elevator doors closed on Thomas, Ms. Albright handed Elena a small encrypted tablet. "He's clear," Ms. Albright said. Elena's fingers flew across the screen. She was typing a command. Command, enact sanctuary, V6 command. Revoke key Vance solutions command. Wipe local shell, V3. A single green line of text appeared. Executing. "It's done," Elena said, handing the tablet back. "And Mr. Thorne?" Ms. Albright asked. "He's downstairs," Elena said, pulling her simple gray coat around her. "He said he wanted to be here for the final breach of contract." Thomas Vance felt like he could fly. He burst out of the elevator into the gleaming, cold marble lobby of DeWitt, Gable & Klein, his lawyer Harrison at his side. "That," Harrison said, letting out a low whistle, "was the cleanest extraction I have ever seen, Tom. A masterpiece. You're a legend." "It's all about predictive agility, Harrison," Thomas said, tapping the side of his nose. He'd never felt more powerful. He was a conqueror. "You see the patterns." "I'll tell you the pattern I saw." Harrison laughed. "I saw a woman who didn't know what she had, and a man who knew exactly what he was worth. She didn't even fight for the company. She let you keep everything." "Why would she fight?" Thomas said, his voice magnanimous. "She knows her place. She knows I built Vance Solutions. She was the bookkeeper. A good girl, but, not in my league. Not anymore." He pulled out his phone, the black iPhone 16 Pro he'd expensed to the company. He hit send on the text to Tiffany. Her reply was a string of champagne and diamond ring emojis. His new life. His new queen. He was so high on his own victory he decided to spread the wealth. He dialed his COO Markham. "Markham," he boomed, pushing through the revolving doors onto the street. The November air was crisp, but Thomas was a furnace of triumph. Yes, boss?" Markham's voice was tinny nervous. He was a solid, if uninspired numbers guy, a perfect lieutenant. "Markham, my man, good news. The distraction is officially handled. The anchor is cut. We are clear for takeoff." "Oh," Markham said. "That's great, boss. Congratulations." "It is great," Thomas said. "And to celebrate, I'm taking the real team for steaks. Clear my schedule for the afternoon. Call the Capitol Grill, get the private room. And tell the dev team, the first bottle of Dom Perignon is on me. We're celebrating the future. The uninterrupted future of Vance Solutions." "Understood, boss. Steaks and champagne. You're the man, Tom." "Damn right I am," Thomas said, hanging up. He was standing on the curb, Harrison beside him. Both men grinning masters of their universe. He was a king standing outside his castle, having just painlessly exiled his quiet, mousy, burdensome queen. He looked down the street. "Where's the car I ordered?" he grumbled. "Right here, boss," Harrison said, gesturing. And Thomas looked up. It wasn't the black Lincoln Town car he'd ordered. It was impossible. Idling silently at the curb, its presence making every other vehicle on the street look like a child's toy, was a Maybach S680. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was a $400,000 block of polished obsidian, a silent mobile fortress of obscene wealth. "Well, damn, Harrison." Thomas breathed impressed despite himself. You really went all out on the congratulations car, didn't you? This is... "That's not my car, Tom." Harrison said, his own voice suddenly small. "My Prius is in the garage." Thomas's smile faltered. He looked at the car. The windows were tinted to a liquid black. It hummed, it didn't idle. It was an alien presence. Then, who? The revolving doors behind them hissed. Elena and Ms. Albright stepped out onto the sidewalk. Thomas barely noticed them. He was still staring at the car. This was the kind of car he should have. He was the visionary. The chauffeur's door opened. A man got out. He wasn't a chauffeur. He was dressed like one in a suit that was sharper than Thomas's, but he moved with the precise economic grace of a high-level security professional. He walked to the rear passenger door and opened it, standing at attention, and a man stepped out. Time stopped. The city noise, the traffic, Harrison's breathing. It all faded. Thomas Vance's heart, which had been soaring, seized in his chest. His blood turned to ice water. He knew that face. The world knew that face. It was the face that stared out from the cover of Forbes, Time, and Wired. The face of the man whose company, Aegis Innovations, was worth more than the GDP of most small countries. It was Julian Thorne. Thomas's mind, a high-speed processor second ago, was now a blue screen of death. Thorne here now. A wild, narcissistic, insane hope flared. "He's here for me. He heard about the divorce. He's making a play. He's here to buy Vance Solutions." Thomas puffed out his chest. He straightened his Tom Ford tie. He took a step forward, his salesman's smile, the one that had charmed clients and investors for a decade, snapping onto his face. He was ready to make the elevator pitch of his life. "Mr. Thorne," Thomas started, his voice a strange, strangled version of his usual boom. "Thomas Vance. I don't know if you..." Julian Thorne didn't look at him. He didn't glance at him. He didn't even register Thomas's existence. To Julian Thorne, Thomas Vance was a piece of sidewalk, a lamppost, a thing. Thorne's eyes, famously intense and analytical, were fixed only on Elena. He walked past Thomas. He stopped in front of the gray mouse. And he smiled. It was not a polite smile. It was not a business smile. It was warm, personal, and brimming with a respect so profound it was almost a physical force. "Elena?" Thorne said, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded markets. "Is it done?" Elena, his Elena, the unambitious burden, the domestic wife. She smiled back, a genuine, radiant smile that Thomas hadn't seen in 10 years. A smile that lit her up from the inside, transforming her in that instant from a gray mouse to someone else, someone powerful. "It's done, Julian," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The Petrova protocol is secure. The Vance engine is now just an empty shell." Thomas's smile didn't just fade. It cracked. It shattered. It fell from his face in 1,000 pieces. "What?" he whispered. What's going on?" Thomas stammered. The words were glue in his mouth. "Elena, you know Julian Thorne." The gray mouse was gone. The woman who turned to him was someone he had never ever seen. Her posture, which had been a mousy slump for a decade, was now ramrod straight. Her eyes, which he'd thought of as dull, were now blazing with a cold, terrifying fire. She laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of a lock rusted for 10 years finally springing open. "Know him," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Thomas Julian was my external examiner for my doctoral thesis at MIT. The hobby you've been mocking. The knitting pattern you just let me keep. The one you joked about." Julian Thorne offered Elena his arm. She took it. They looked, Thomas thought, with a sickening lurch, perfect together. Power and power. Ms. Petrova's hobby, Mr. Vance. Thorne said, his voice as cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, is a predictive analytics engine that is conservatively 5 years ahead of anything Aegis has ever seen. It's not a business tool. It is quite literally a crystal ball. And you just gave it away. The blood drained from Thomas's face. The pavement of the street seemed to tilt beneath his feet. No, he stuttered. The Vance engine. That's mine. The company. Vance Solutions. Our IP. It's in the contract. Indeed it is, said a sharp voice. Ms. Albright. The scalpel stepped forward. And the contract is very clear. Vance Solutions owns all the work product you paid for, Mr. Vance. Thorne checked his watch. A quiet, impossibly elegant Patek Philippe Calatrava. Elena hasn't been a salaried employee of Vance Solutions for 3 years and 4 months. Check your own books. You moved her off payroll to save on taxes and simplify the corporate structure. Your words, I believe. You listed her as an unpaid spousal partner, Ms. Albright continued, reading from her notes. Which means for 3 years all of her work, all of her personal projects, including the Petrova Protocol, have been her own. And, Elena added, her voice chillingly calm, that one little clause I asked for. The one you laughed at, the Petrova Protocol, was never on a Vance Solutions server, Thomas. Not the real one. The Vance engine you've been selling was a 2018 demo. A toy. The real engine, the V6.0, was on my own private network in my studio. The one you called a fire hazard. The pieces were not falling into place. They were slamming into place with the force of a nuclear detonation. Every single triumph. The Gentech miracle. The call system's logistics solution. The net core financial projection that had made him. It wasn't him. It was her. It was all her. He wasn't the visionary. He was a spokesman. He was a mascot. You planned this, Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. He looked from Elena to Thorne. This is collusion. Thorne actually chuckled. A cold, dry, humorless sound. Mr. Vance, collusion is what criminals do. This is due diligence. I have been trying to hire Ms. Petrova for a decade, since the day she publicly humiliated me in a coding competition. But she was loyal, to a fault. She kept saying her husband's company needed her help. He gave Thomas a look of profound biological contempt. A rocket engine was trying to power your bicycle, and you were complaining about the noise. So I waited, Thorne continued, and when my team alerted me that you had filed for divorce, well, let's just say I reopened negotiations. And this time, The offer was substantial. He's giving me, Elena said, her voice clear in the sudden silence, a $2 billion holding company to run, Aegis Petrova Dynamics. We're moving the real V6.0 to the Zurich bunker tonight. $2 billion. Thomas choked. Oh, and Thomas, Elena said, turning. This part was for him and him alone. You were right. I am a burden, an unambitious burden. I found the texts, Thomas. I found the Maldives reservation. I found everything. She let that hang in the air. You were going to cut the cord, she whispered, her voice a venomous dart. You were going to buy me a condo. You were going to cut out the cancer. I just beat you to the operating table, she whispered, her voice a venomous dart. You were going to cut the cord. I just beat you to the scalpel. It's a lie, Thomas shrieked, looking at Harrison. Harrison, do something, sue them. Harrison the bulldog looked pale. He was looking at Julian Thorne, at Ms. Albright, and at the Maybach. He was a man who knew instinctively when he was outgunned. Tom, Harrison whispered, you told me she was a non-contributing spouse. You joked about the Petrova protocol. Oh God, you signed the addendum. It's her property. It's all hers. We're going to be late, Elena, Thorne said, ignoring the meltdown. He gestured to the Maybach. Arthur will take you to the Teterboro. The G650 is waiting. I have one last piece of business here. Thomas's fading hope flickered. He's staying. He's talking to me. Elena got into the car. The door shut with a silent, heavy, final thud. It was the sound of a vault closing. The Maybach pulled away its engine, a whisper. It was gone. Thomas was left on the curb. His $5,000 suit suddenly felt like a cheap polyester rag. He was alone, with Julian Thorne. Thorne turned. The warmth he'd shown Elena was gone. His eyes were Arctic ice. Mr. Vance? Mr. Thorne, sir? Thomas begged, his voice cracking. Listen, this is a misunderstanding. Elena, she's emotional. We can make a deal. We had a deal, Thorne said. You were my unwitting beta tester, and you just breached your EULA. Thorne pulled a phone from his pocket. He didn't dial. He just spoke to the man who materialized at his side, his head of security. Alex. Sir. Inform our legal teams. Gentech Pharma. Call Systems Logistics. Netcore Financial. Thomas's stomach dissolved. His three biggest clients. All three are portfolio companies of Aegis Innovations, Thorne said to Thomas conversationally. All three signed with Vance Solutions based solely on the guaranteed performance of the Petrova Protocol V3.0, an engine which, as of 90 seconds ago, you no longer possess, and in fact are legally forbidden from accessing as per the addendum you signed. No. Wait. Please. Thomas was choking. Alex, Thorne continued, enact the termination for breach clauses. All three contracts. Effective immediately. And begin litigation. I want damages. I want everything. He built a company on our IP. I want it back. With interest. You can't, Thomas cried. It'll ruin me. Julian Thorne looked at Thomas, truly looked at him for the first time. It was a look of profound biological disinterest, like a man looking at a bug he'd just found on his shoe. Yes, Thorne said. That is the point. You had a deal, Thorne said, echoing Thomas's own words. You had a partner who was smarter than I am, more loyal than you deserved, and you treated her like ballast. You didn't just lose your wife, Mr. Vance. You just lost your company. You just don't know it yet. Thorne turned and walked away. A second identical black car, a Rolls-Royce Ghost, pulled up. He got in and was gone. Thomas stood on the sidewalk. He was no longer a king. He was a statue frozen in the exact moment of its own destruction. Harrison the bulldog was backing away, holding his hands up. "Tom, I can't. I'm recusing myself. You lied to me. You're radioactive. Don't call me." Harrison turned and for the first time in his professional life fled. Thomas was alone. The sound of the city, the traffic, the people, it all came rushing back in a deafening, painful roar. His personal phone buzzed. Tiffany. "I'm at Lebain poppin' bottles. Where are you, my king?" He felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to grip a nearby lamppost. His other phone, his work phone, rang. The screen flashed Markham, COO. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely accept the call. "Markham," he started, his voice a hollow croak. The stakes. We're postponing." "Shut up," Markham shrieked. The sound was so high-pitched, so full of pure animal panic that Thomas pulled the phone from his ear. "Just shut up. Tom, what did you do?" What do you mean, the engine? The Vance engine? It's gone." What do you mean, gone?" Thomas whispered, a new cold terror creeping up his spine. "Like, down." "No," Markham screamed. "Not down, down. I can fix down is a problem. This is a void. It's revoked. Our core system. It's not gone. Tom, it's empty. The partitions they're blank. All our proprietary code, the magic, it's just a blank directory, a login screen we don't have the keys. It's pointing to a server in Zurich." The backups," Thomas stammered. Call the backups. Restore from yesterday." "I am," Markham sobbed, a grown man sobbing. That's what I'm telling you. The backups are gone. The cloud instances are empty. The off-site cold storage. It's not gone. Tom, it's encrypted. With a key we don't have. It's bricked. All of it. Tom, what is the Petrova Protocol?" Thomas's knees buckled. "Tom, what is it?" Markham screamed. It's an illegal email that just hit my inbox. A cease and desist from Aegis Innovations, it says. Unauthorized use of Petrova Protocol IP 881A. Tom, that's our engine. That's the name of the source code. It was never ours. Was it, Tom? Thomas couldn't speak. He was just breathing. Short, shallow, panicked gasps. "Oh, God," Markham whispered. "Oh, God. It was her. It was all Elena. We all knew she was smart, Tom, but we thought you. Oh, you idiot. You idiot. You didn't divorce your wife, Tom. You divorced the company." An email pinged on his phone. The subject line was cold stark. From legal@gentech.com. Subject: urgent notice of termination for material breach of contract ping. From legal@callsystems.com. Subject: contract termination. Effective immediately. Ping. From legal@netcore.com. Subject: legal action initiated. Breach damages and fraud. It was an avalanche. It was a digital execution. In the span of 5 minutes, Vance Solutions, his multi-million-dollar empire, his life's work, had evaporated. It was now just a brand name, an empty office, and a mountain of catastrophic, unpayable debt. The house. The glass and steel mansion from Architectural Digest. The one he'd put up as collateral for the last round of expansion. The one that was leveraged to the hilt. To pay for Tiffany's new consulting contract. The lump sum payment. The $500,000 he'd just generously given Elena. It was the only liquid cash he had. And she had let him give it to her. She hadn't needed his money. She had taken it. As a parting gift, she'd let him pay her. For his own execution. The sound that ripped out of Thomas's throat was not human. It was a raw, ugly, wounded animal sound. It was the sound of a man who had been skinned alive in 5 minutes on a public street. He, Thomas Vance, the Titan, the visionary, the face, slid down the lamppost, the $15,000 divorce papers scattering from his numb fingers onto the wet, dirty pavement. He smiled, signing the papers. Now he sat on a dirty city street, and he cried. He cried as the first damning news alert lit up his phone, from Forbes News Alert. Subject: Julian Thorne and mystery prodigy Elena Petrova launched $2 billion, Aegis Petrova Dynamics, to revolutionize AI. The rest of Thomas Vance's day was a blur of catastrophic failure, a masterclass in total unrecoverable collapse. 2:30 p.m. He stumbles back into the Vance Solutions office. He took the subway. He paid for a ticket. The open-plan, collaborative space he'd been so proud of is in total chaos. The phones are ringing off the hook, a symphony of angry clients. Young employees, the dev team he was going to buy champagne for, are clustered by the windows, their faces pale, scrolling through the Forbes article on their phones. They look up as he enters. It's not respect he sees. It's pity and contempt. Markham is in his glass-walled office. Thomas's office, his head in his hands. "The press is calling, Tom," Markham whispered, his voice ravaged. He didn't look up. "The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. They're running the Aegis Petrova story. They're asking us for comment. They're calling you a fraud, Tom, the Milli Vanilli of tech. Tell them it's a hostile takeover," Thomas said, grasping at straws. A theft. A theft of what, Tom?" Markham stood, his face white with rage. "A theft of the thing you told us for 10 years was yours. Are you going to go on record and announce to the world that your ex-wife was the only valuable thing in this company and you were too stupid to know it? She tricked me." "No, Tom," Markham roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "She just let you. She let you be you, and this is what you are. You're a brochure, Tom. A handsome, glossy, empty brochure." Markham ripped his ID badge from his neck and threw it at Thomas. You can have the stakes, Tom. I'm going to go talk to a lawyer. And then I'm going to go talk to the Wall Street Journal." Markham shouldered past him and walked out. He didn't look back. 4:00 p.m. Tiffany arrives. She does not look like her Instagram photos. Her face is a mask of fury, her eyes red from crying, no, rage. "Thomas," she says. Her voice is not the high, breathy coo of Tom Tom. It is hard. It is cold. "Tiff, baby, thank God." He starts moving to hug her. It's been a nightmare. Listen, that bitch, she..." Tiffany slaps him. The sound cracks through the empty office. "You idiot," she seethes. My agent just called me, my sponsors. The skincare line, the athleisure brand, they're dropping me. They're enacting the morality clause." "What, why?" "Why?" she mocks. "Because my brand is associated with you." Because I'm all over the internet as the mistress of the biggest fraud in tech. I'm a laughingstock. Tiff, baby, we can fix this, he pleads. The Maldives. The Maldives. She laughs a harsh, ugly sound. My lawyer just called me. He said, our consulting fees, the money you gave me, it can be clawed back in a bankruptcy. He says I might have to pay it back. She wasn't here to comfort him. She was here to untag herself. You told me she was nothing. Tom, Tiffany accused, her eyes narrowing. You said you were the genius. I tied my brand to you. I am the genius, he insisted, a pathetic, desperate edge to his voice. No, she said, pulling a Cartier love bracelet from her wrist, one he'd bought her with Gentech money, and tossing it on his desk. It clattered loud in the silence. You're not. You're just a loud, empty suit. You're last year's model Thomas. And you're boring. She turned and her heels clicked an angry final rhythm on the imported Italian marble floors. She was gone. 6:00 p.m. The sun is setting. The office is dark. The power, he realizes, has been shut off. The automatic payment must have failed. The employees are gone. Markham is gone. Tiffany is gone. Thomas is alone, in his $100,000 office, in the dark, staring at the skyline, at the lights of other companies, real companies. His company was a hollowed-out carcass. His fiancée had abandoned him. His lawyers had abandoned him. The lawsuits from his clients, his landlord Aegis Innovations, and soon his employees. It wouldn't just be a flood. It would be a tsunami. He was ruined. He was a man who had everything, and in his greed, his arrogance to get more, he had lost it all. He thought for the first time not about the company, but about Elena. He remembered her in college, her face lit by a computer screen, her brow furrowed. He remembered her looking up at him, her eyes bright. Thomas, I think I've solved it. She had always solved it. And he had hated her for it. He thought of her face in the law office, the stillness. It wasn't surrender. It was patience. It was the patience of a bomber sitting in the cockpit, her hand on the release, just waiting for the perfect moment. His phone, his personal phone, buzzed. He fumbled for it. 1 bar of battery left. A text from an unknown international number. +41, Switzerland. It was a single image, a photo taken from the window of a private jet. It showed a snow-capped mountain range, the Alps glowing pink in the sunset. In the foreground, a single hand was visible holding a glass of champagne. Elena's hand. On her 4th finger was not the modest wedding band he'd given her. It was a new ring. A simple, elegant platinum band set with a single flawless blue-gray diamond that Thomas knew instinctively cost more than his entire house. And on her wrist. Thomas's stomach dissolved. On her wrist was Julian Thorne's Patek Philippe Calatrava. The same one Thorne had been wearing in the lobby. He hadn't just given her a ring. He'd given her his watch. Thomas's mind, which had insisted they were just partners, finally shattered. It wasn't just a partnership. It wasn't just a new job. It was a replacement, in every possible way. He looked at the photo of the Alps, at the watch, at the ring. He looked at his own empty, darkening office. He looked at the useless Cartier bracelet on his desk. He had smiled, signing those papers. He thought he was closing a deal. He had been. He'd just been on the wrong side of it. And as the full, complete, and utter totality of his ruin, financial, professional, personal, finally settled upon him, Thomas Vance, the visionary, the king, the fraud, put his head on his desk next to a bracelet from a woman who'd left him. And for the first time, he cried. He wept for his company. He wept for his money. And he wept most bitterly of all for the watch he could never buy. And the woman who would never again look at him. And that, as they say, is the end of the story, but the beginning of Elena's. We watch these stories and we wait for the twist, for that moment of karmic justice. Thomas thought he was the main character, but he was just the before photo in Elena's after. It's a powerful reminder: never ever underestimate the quiet ones. They're not just listening, they're taking notes. What did you think of Thomas's downfall? Was it justified, or was Elena just as cold as he was? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story and want to hear more tales of drama, justice, and shocking twists, do me a solid, hit that like button, click subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, go ahead and share it with them. Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next one.